Almost any time that I've made a video about a specific alien, there's always been some sort of major reason behind it, ranging from being unpopular but deserving more attention, having a fall from grace, or just being categorized in a certain group. There's already been a good handful of aliens that I've talked about in the half a year I've been doing Ben 10 videos. So I thought to myself, why don't I just talk about an alien I really love just for the fun of it? And among some of my absolute favorites, I felt like talking about Lodestar. I personally feel that Lodestar is a hidden gem among Ben's arsenal, being not too popular but not too unpopular, but somewhere right in the middle. As I do with all my alien related videos, I want to talk about exactly who Lodestar is and what makes him cool. And I also want to dive deep into some potential that Lodestar could have had he got to have more appearances like I do with a lot of my other videos regarding underutilized aliens. I'm also curious if I'll be able to provide a new perspective of Lodestar for a lot of people who may not care for him as much. But before any of that, let's start properly by first establishing who Lodestar is. Lodestar is a Biot Savartian from the planet Maxwell and would first appear in the Season 3 episode of Alien Force, Simple. To start off with his character design, I've always loved how unique Lodestar looked compared to Ben's other aliens. The first thing that'll probably catch your attention about Lodestar's design is his floating head. When you look at Lodestar's upper half, you'll notice that he's kind of shaped like a magnet, with his giant pointy shoulders and the metal head in the center. The detailing on his head, such as the bolts and shading of his eyes, is really cool. I'm also a big fan of his color scheme. Yellow is one of my favorite colors, and having it mixed with black and brown shading I think stands out in the best ways possible, as the only other yellow alien we've had at this point really is Cannonbolt. Now as for what Lodestar is made of, I feel like the obvious answer would be metal. However, a part of me feels like he might be made of magnetic rocks, given that his name Lodestar is very similar to lodestone, a real-world magnetic mineral. As for Lodestar's powers, the main thing he has is magnetism. He can use his magnetism in creative ways, such as regenerating his own body or creating an electromagnetic field around him. Lodestar is also able to fly and levitate. While Lodestar's power kit seems really simple, I think Lodestar potentially has one of the most overpowered power sets of any of Ben's aliens if used correctly, but we'll get more into that later on. With a fun design and cool powers, does Lodestar get proper use during Alien Force and Ultimate Alien? Let's figure it out by first talking about his debut in Simple. Now there's not much to talk about when it comes to Lodestar's debut, as his scene in Simple is really just an excuse to show off that Ben got a new alien and to briefly show off what he can do. Even with that in mind, I still think his debut is pretty neat. Before I talk about what Lodestar does in this scene, I want to talk about his transformation sequence, because as simple as it is, I just realized what I said, God, I'm awful. As simple as it is, I love how it's like the little magnetic pieces coming together and informing the shape of Lodestar, and the way it warps into his shape instead of just building piece by piece is just really cool to me. After magnetizing a bunch of the Red Army's guns to himself, he propels them back at the army, which is a neat little way to show off his magnetism. We also get this really funny frame of Lodestar just sitting down casually, which I love to death. There is one thing I should mention about Lodestar's debut, and that is the fact that this is Ben's genuine first reaction to using him, which is evident in the way that Ben talks, and it's also evident in the way that Gwen and Kevin react to Lodestar.
Lodestar! Oh man, this is no time to shake down a new guy. Ow! Oh, wait a minute.
Is that a new one?
Who keeps track?
Now, if you're a longtime Ben 10 fan, then you probably already noticed, but by technicality, this shouldn't be Ben's first genuine reaction to using Lodestar. The reason for this being is because at the end of Season 2, we do see Ben actually unlocking Lodestar. He actually even turns into him at the end of the episode, but it just cuts to black to, be a little teaser for Season 3. So in actuality, Ben should already know about Lodestar, but this scene acts like he doesn't, which is a little confusing. I know out of universe it's actually because they want the audience to be introduced to Lodestar properly, but in universe, again, it doesn't make any sense. I figured I'd mention this very briefly just so you guys know that I'm aware of this, but it doesn't really bother me personally for his debut. I should also mention that this is considered to be the best part of Simple, because this episode is like one of the most hated in the entire franchise, and I personally love this episode. In fact, I actually defended this episode way back in my very first Ben 10 video because I absolutely love this episode, and yes, Lodestar's debut is a part of it, but there's more to it than that, but I'm getting off topic. After Simple, Lodestar doesn't have many other appearances in Alien Force since he was introduced during Season 3, and wouldn't really get much appearances until the second half of the season. His next appearance would be in the episode Busy Box. This episode does a much better job of showing off Lodestar's powers than the previous one, as we get to see Lodestar magnetize a whole bunch of cars against the Nalgene Destructor. The way all the cars surround Lodestar as he magnetizes them to collide with the Destructor is really cool, and it just shows a little bit of how powerful Lodestar can truly be. I also really like the implication that Lodestar can sort of control the strength of his magnetizing, as at the end of the episode he has to give a little bit more of a push when opening up the Destructor's chest. Another appearance I really like for Lodestar in Alien Force is the episode Vendetta. One thing I like about Lodestar is that he fights with his environment. Since there's metal around almost all of the time, I like to see Lodestar use other metallic objects besides cars to fight, and in this episode he uses 2 garage doors to sandwich Ragnarok. It doesn't really do anything to him, but it's still a cool idea nonetheless. I feel like there's a lot of creative ways that Lodestar can fight without just relying on throwing metal stuff at people. One of my favorite examples of this comes from Absolute Power Part 1. During Ben's hunt against Kevin, he is ruthless, and one of my favorite parts about this is when he uses Lodestar against the Forever Knights. Not only does he use their metal suits against them, but he takes one Forever Knight and sort of homing attacks other Forever Knights with that Forever Knight that he's using. I think that's so cool and underappreciated. Another creative use of his combat with magnetism comes from the episode Ultimate Aggregor. I love the small moment where Lodestar magnetizes 2 Aggregor bots and just slams them into each other. That's so raw. In fact, this entire episode for Lodestar shows a lot of his most creative abilities. Another thing that Lodestar is able to do is make an electromagnetic field around him to protect himself. Kinda reminds me of the electric shield from Sonic 3. And of course I want to bring up Lodestar's regeneration. This is the only time we actually get to see Lodestar's regeneration, not counting his transformation sequence, and I think it's really cool and unique. Considering that my previous video had Swampfire in it, who is also able to regenerate, it made me realize that every alien that can regenerate, regenerates in their own way, and Lodestar is no different. It really does look like a bunch of magnets attracting to each other, and reminds me more of Lodestone, which I brought up earlier. And of course, if I want to bring up Lodestar's creative moments, how can I not mention the episode The Purge? Remember how I said that I really like when Lodestar fights with his environment? I feel like this is one of the only episodes that really takes advantage of that. While looking for Forever Knights in one of their castles, they come across a robot dragon from the Alien Force pilot. Ben, knowing that it's a robot unlike last time, uses Lodestar to fight it off. But by trying to fight off the dragon by magnetizing everything to it, Kevin also ends up being a part of that magnetic pull. This gives Ben the idea to try the new thing, and what that new thing is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen for Lodestar personally. Kevin uses his body to become a missile while Lodestar magnetizes Kevin to basically propel through the dragon's chest, and it's one of the coolest tactics I've ever seen. I love when Ben's aliens and Kevin or Gwen's powers work together to create some really cool combinations, this being among my favorite. As far as other UAF appearances, there are still episodes that I enjoy Lodestar's presence in, but he doesn't really get to do anything too creative. For example, I enjoy his presence in Girl Trouble. I do like seeing him fight the Computrons, and he does exemplify more of that extra strength he needs to make more powerful magnet pulls, so that's kinda cool. I do like in Primus when he overpowers the Tekadon very easily given his magnetizing powers. And I can forgive the fact that Duped basically botched one of the coolest scenes we could have ever gotten in Ben 10, aka 3 Bens fighting with 3 different aliens, because it does mean that Lodestar gets to save the day. Lodestar does have 2 other major appearances in UAF that I do want to bring up, but not just yet for a reason I'll get into later. It's a shame that Lodestar only got a handful of appearances during Alien Force and Ultimate Alien, but I am glad to say that I think a lot of his scenes he was used pretty well. Before I get into other things I feel like Lodestar could have done or is capable of, I do want to discuss how Lodestar is handled in Omniverse. As for Lodestar's new design in Omniverse, there's not a whole lot of changes, and the most major one is his head, but other than that, he looks pretty much almost the same. Now, while the changes are subtle, I actually really do like the little headpiece they give him, and I really like his proportions and his head shape in Omniverse. Given that Lodestar's design isn't really that different from UAF, I can't tell if I'm in the minority or the majority when I say I do prefer Omniverse's design. One thing that I should mention is that in Omniverse, when Lodestar talks, his mouth can actually move, unlike UAF where it couldn't open at all minus some cursed errors. On the subject of Lodestar's mouth, let's actually talk about his voice. In both UAF and Omniverse, Lodestar is voiced by D. Bradley Baker. However, there is a difference between UAF and Omniverse Lodestar when it comes to the actual performance. In UAF, when Lodestar spoke, he had a very robotic voice, almost as if he was speaking through a radio or something.
And you have got to sit down with your enemies and talk to them. They're human too, you know. Or whatever it is you guys are. My magnetic personality makes me more than a match for you.
Kevin Levin. Where do I find him? I said, where is he?
It could be worse. I'm not sure how, but I'm trying to keep a positive attitude.
In Omniverse, they changed it to where instead of having this like robotic voice that sounds like a radio, it's more so of like a metallic sound behind his voice, which doesn't sound bad by any means, but I think it's a step down from UAF.
Come on, give me something good.
Not what I was going for, but I can work with this. You get the twins, I got the robot. Throwing stars, not a problem. Ow! Unless they're not metal. Nerd? Really? Face it, Sir Dunce-a-lot. You're not getting away with him.
I like both performances, but I feel like Omniverse's voice for Lodestar is just a little less unique compared to UAF. But regardless of the voice downgrade, I think that his design is still great, and I still think he sounds pretty good. But now it's time to talk about how Lodestar is actually implemented in Omniverse. I can think of one word to describe how Lodestar is used in Omniverse. Barely. Similar to other Alien Force aliens like Swampfire, Goop, Brainstorm, or Chromastone, Lodestar barely gets any time to shine in Omniverse. It's among some of the worst, actually. Despite first appearing in the very first episode of Omniverse, Omniverse Lodestar only gets one other appearance across the 80 episodes of the entire show, which is insane to me. There is a huge reason on why Lodestar of all the aliens among every single alien should have been used more in Omniverse, but I'm gonna save that for a little bit later. You might already know what the reason is and where I'm getting at, but again, we'll save that for later. For now, let's talk about the 2 times that Ben uses Lodestar and still see if we can enjoy those scenes. The first time we see Ben use Lodestar in Omniverse is in the More Things Changed Part 1. In fact, he's the very first alien that 16-year-old Ben uses in the entire show. I do like that even though this scene is really brief, we get to see more of Lodestar and Metal Kevin working together. I don't think it's as cool as UAF, but it's still really nice to see come back. The other time that Ben uses Lodestar is in the episode Return to Forever. This scene isn't too action-packed, but there are 2 things I really like. One is seeing Lodestar uses magnetism in order to stop the Forever Knight car from taking Jimmy away. The other is the fact that the Forever Knights actually are aware of Lodestar's magnetism and have non-metal objects to throw at him as a precaution, probably because of how Ben annihilated them in Absolute Power Part 1. But after that, that's all we get of Lodestar for the rest of the show, which is such a shame. I really do love Omniverse Lodestar's design, but he doesn't have any of the screen time to back it up, so unfortunately, I can't really say he was handled well in Omniverse at all. His 2 scenes are passable, but nothing more. But what if we could have given more to Lodestar? Before I get into missed opportunities with Lodestar and just to show how capable he could really be, I want to talk about something very interesting I learned very recently. As I mentioned before, Lodestar's planet is known as Maxwell, but this technically wasn't always the case, at least according to other media. In certain Ben 10 books, Lodestar's planet would be known as other things, such as Attracta or Electront. Personally, I actually like both of those names more than Maxwell, and I know why it's called Maxwell, which is a reference to James Clerk Maxwell. In fact, the Biot-Savart law that he uses was used as a reference for his species name. I also want to bring up Lodestar's powers in terms of aesthetics because they do change color from time to time. In his debut as well as in Ultimate Alien, his magnetic pulses are white. However, in other Alien Force appearances in Omniverse, they're green. Personally, I like the white more because while I do like green being implemented in a lot of Ben's aliens, I feel like sometimes a little change of pace wouldn't hurt, and I think Lodestar having white pulses just looks better with his color scheme. I know this is like super nitpicky and very cornplate tweet energy, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway because I love Lodestar. Speaking of Lodestar's powers, there's actually a few powers that he has that we never get to see in the show according to other media. This is a similar case to Frankenstrike, who had the ability to supposedly regenerate his limbs and stuff, but I'm still going to talk about it because I feel like it's very interesting. On Lodestar's card for his figure, there are 2 interesting powers that I wish we could have seen. The first one involves his vision. Supposedly, Lodestar has radar vision, and he uses the electromagnetic spectrum to see things. The other one that we never get to see is that his skin pattern can change like flowing ink when his magnetic fields shift. Now, as for the reason why we don't see this is probably because it would be a pain in the ass to animate. And while it's not in the show proper, in the video game Ben 10 Rise of Hex, Lodestar is one of the playable aliens. Lodestar's trait ability in the game is that he's able to magnetize himself to metal emblems on walls in the underground levels. While on the subject of Lodestar magnetizing himself to stuff, Lodestar can make other metallic objects magnetic. An example of this can be seen in Duped when he throws Kevin's car at Urian. The last thing I want to point out, and I don't really do this for a lot of the aliens I talk about, but the concept art for Lodestar, while it's not really that different in terms of his actual proportions and everything, I find it very interesting that he was originally going to be silver and orange at one point. In fact, if Mad Ben and Omniverse got to use Lodestar, I would have loved if this concept art was referenced in some way. Now that we have discussed the actual use of Lodestar in both UAF and Omniverse, I want to take some time to talk about the missed potential that Lodestar could have had to be more creative when he fights. Starting off with his actual head. Earlier I said I wanted to ignore 2 episodes that Lodestar was used in, and they both involve his head. Those 2 episodes are Video Games and The Night of the Living Nightmare. In Video Games, there's not really much to talk about. Basically, he tries to fight off the Stalker and it doesn't work because he's not made of metal, and then the Stalker attacks him by grabbing his head and throwing him through a house. 2 random sidetracks, but first of all, this Stalker, I cannot think of him without thinking of the Castlevania song called Stalker. And 2, god damn, Lodestar is huge. I never noticed it, but have you ever noticed that Lodestar is low-key kind of big? He looks like he'd be just average size, but he's kind of huge. As for that other episode, Night of the Living Nightmare, this one is actually a really fun Lodestar appearance, as brief as it is. Ben fights off a Nightmare Agogor, and when Agogor attacks Lodestar's head, it gets stuck in Kevin's car. Thus, Lodestar's body has to act on its own. And I do find it kind of amusing seeing Ben try to play hot and cold with his own body.
Warm. Ugh, cold again. Colder. Warmer. Your ears are over here with me. You can't hear a word I'm saying, can you?
Now, the reason why I'm bringing up his head specifically is the fact that what's stopping Lodestar from using his own head for combat? An example of what I'm talking about is in the Sega Genesis game Decap Attack. In that game, you play as Chuck D. Head. Yes, it's a very funny pun, I know. And basically, you have this skeleton head that you could throw at enemies. While magnetism is the main thing Lodestar is known for, how cool would it be to see him use his head and separate it to basically attack enemies from a distance? In a way, it would kind of be like how Goop uses UFO to chop up Swampfire into little pieces. However, that's just the simple stuff that I think Lodestar could do that they didn't really capitalize on. Now let's start talking about the more powerful stuff. When it comes to Lodestar, what is one word you could use to describe him? Magnetic. The amount of times I've said magnetism in this video is insane. But what's more insane is some of the stuff that Lodestar could potentially do. Lodestar is far from the first character to ever have any sort of magnetic abilities. So with that said, there are 2 magnetic characters I wanted to bring up that could do some really crazy shit that Lodestar would also be capable of. As someone who's currently watching One Piece, I'm gonna just say this now, if you haven't got to this episode at all, make sure you skip to this point of the video because I'm going to be talking about a character that's introduced within this episode range. Anyways, with that said, the character I want to reference is Eustace D. Kidd. Eustace has magnetic powers, and one thing that he does is he draws all the weapons from the Marines and creates a giant metallic arm to attack with. Now, while Lodestar can regenerate, who says he can't use his magnetism in order to not only increase his offense, but also his defense? Now, as far as Eustace himself, I don't know if he does anything more crazier in the show. I'm up to this episode in particular, so please no spoilers if you know what happens. Even with little to no knowledge of what happens with Eustace in the future, he's become one of my favorite male characters in One Piece because he's just so fucking badass. Now, as for the other character with magnetism, there is one incredibly obvious character that I think came up in everyone's mind when I mentioned magnetism. Magneto from X-Men. Now, I'm an X-Men fan, but a very casual one, as most of the X-Men related lore that I do know about is from X-Men Evolution, so I can't reference every single thing that Magneto has ever done. But there is one specific scene that I do want to mention from one of the live-action X-Men movies. In X-Men The Last Stand, Magneto does one of the absolute coolest things I've ever seen in any film ever. He takes the Golden Gate Bridge with his magnetism and just moves it casually to create a bridge to Alcatraz. I have no doubt in my mind that Lodestar would be absolutely capable of this. Not only that, but Magneto also fucks with buildings and anything metal, and Lodestar, again, can absolutely do this. Now, obviously, Ben wouldn't be on some destructive rampage for no reason, but imagine, if Lodestar really wanted to, he could just take skyscrapers and just completely demolish everything. These are just some of the reasons on why I think Lodestar is potentially one of Ben's most powerful aliens. He just doesn't get as much recognition as someone like way bigger Gravitack. Even other characters with magnetism have shown off ways that Lodestar could still potentially use his magnetism to very powerful uses. In Sonic Generations, there's a rival battle against Silver the Hedgehog, and at the end of that battle, Silver creates a giant ball of metal and rocks to chase Sonic down. Lodestar can 100% do this with all metallic objects. Think of like cars and street signs and stuff and parts of buildings. Like 100% Lodestar can do this. It kind of made me think of something. If Lodestar was in the episode The Widening Gyre, he could just split open that trash monster into multiple pieces and just blow it up. Don't get me wrong, the way big scene is certainly a scene, but I still would have liked to see Lodestar more. But that's just one alien that could have appeared. In fact, there's quite a few episodes where I feel like Lodestar could be such a simple solution to a problem. But there is one particular solution I really want to talk about, so let's get into that. As we established, Lodestar was not used almost ever in Omniverse. And unlike some other aliens, there's no direct reason as to why. Although I wouldn't be surprised if toy sales had something to do with it, as it influenced a lot of aliens barely appearing. And as a kid, I never saw Lodestar in Toys R Us. I had more of a chance of growing movement in Thracia 776 than I do fucking finding a Lodestar figure. However, I have one theory as to why Lodestar didn't appear especially early on. Let's talk about Upgrade for a second, one of the original 10 aliens that Ben ever used. This is Malware, a member of the same species and the main villain of the first 2 seasons of Omniverse. Did you know that these two have the same powers? And did you also know they have the same weaknesses? What is that weakness? Magnetism. Despite the fact that Malware is very prevalent as Ben's main enemy in the first 2 seasons of Omniverse, Ben himself never gets the idea to use Lodestar, which is made even crazier to think about considering that in the episode Outbreak, Ben even points out the Galvanic Mechamorph's own weakness. And they even show this weakness later on with Ben using Upgrade and Animo Crackers.
The Megamorph girl is sensitive to magnetic fields! Nice!
Now, of course, out of universe, you could say this is because if Ben used Lodestar, then the battle would be won instantly and there'd be no arc. I get that. And sometimes an obvious solution to a problem just may slip your mind. But I can't lie, sometimes in the back of my head, I just think, why doesn't Ben just use Lodestar when he's dealing with Malware? And Malfactor, when he's chasing him down as Humongosaur, guess what he could have done? He could have used a Lodestar. Or what about when Vilgax and Malware fuse together in Malgax attacks? Ben could have used Lodestar. I can make some defense for him not being used in Showdown Part 2, because since Malware was fusing himself with Galvin, if magnetism affected him, maybe it would fuck up the planet, so I could understand Lodestar not being there, but other times he clearly could have been used. And of course, another reason why Lodestar wasn't used against Malware was because of the fact that feedback exists. I don't want to come across as a feedback hater, considering that in my previous video I talked about how I feel like he's the reason why Chromostone was just shafted completely in Omniverse. In fact, I even praised him somewhat in my Electric Aliens video, but I do feel like since they wanted to focus on feedback being Malware's main enemy in terms of Ben's alien arsenal, Lodestar was completely benched aside. There are scenarios where the main hero has the weakness to the main bad guy that could still be written pretty well. The main example that comes to mind for me personally is Static Shock. Virgil Hawkins, aka Static, has the ability of electrokinesis as well as some magnetism. His biggest enemy is Ebon, a living shadow, and his main weakness is light, which of course includes electricity. Now on paper that sounds really simple. All you have to do is have Static zap Ebon once and he's history. And while that is how Ebon is defeated in a lot of the episodes that he's in, Ebon is still a threat to Static. Now of course I know the comparison of Static and Ebon with Ben and Malware isn't exactly the same obviously, but I felt like it was a comparison worth mentioning. The main thing I want to come across is that Lodestar is not only a very simple solution to deal with Malware, he is also a very versatile and incredibly powerful alien I feel like that Ben never takes advantage of. Now I don't want to list every time that Lodestar could have been used, especially since I don't want to say that he should be in every single episode, but again, I would have loved more Lodestar. But if I could think of 2 scenarios where Lodestar would have been crazy and really fun to see, it's in the episodes Special Delivery and Color of Monkey. Now those 2 may seem like really random episode choices, but just hear me out for a second. When Ben is surrounded by a chunk of his enemies in a junkyard, he uses Humongosaur, and that scene actually isn't that bad. But what if he used Lodestar to move all the metal trash around to his advantage? advantage. And considering that Siphon is still in possession of the Dwarf Star, I don't think it would necessarily alter the fact that Toepick would be the solution to the episode. As for Color of Monkey, while it was cool to see upgrade to speed 10, why didn't Ben just try to go Lodestar and just magnetize Rojo's bike to him? Hell, as I'm recording audio, I just realized in Clyde 5, when Clyde's suit is going out of control, why doesn't he just go Lodestar to try to stop it? It's made of metal. Or how about it's in a Mad Ben World Part 2? While I do enjoy Nanomech being the solution to deal with Mad Ben as Way Big, how cool would it have been if Lodestar somehow used his magnetism with all the industrial shit around to stop Way Big? And combining that with Frankenstrike's electricity from Ben 23 would have been amazing. I also thought about the episode Tummy Trouble. While dealing with the entire Incursion army, imagine if Lodestar just took all of their metallic ships and just rose them up and then just slammed them down. In fact, any armada with any sort of metallic vehicles or ships or anything are just fucked if Lodestar's around. Like I said, I just think Lodestar's versatility is incredibly underappreciated and just never acknowledged. At this point, if you're still not sure on why I love Lodestar so much and why I think he may be one of Ben 10's biggest sleeper hits, I don't know what else to tell you. This may be a potential hot take, but I think that Lodestar deserves to be considered one of Ben's most powerful aliens along with Gravitack or Way Big. He may not get the most screen time or the most utilization, but I still think that he's incredibly awesome. To this day, he still remains one of my top 3 aliens of all time. Once in a while, I do see other people who favor Lodestar similar to me, so I'm glad to see there are other people who see the charm in Lodestar. But of course, I want to know what you think of Lodestar. Do you simply just like him? Do you not care for Lodestar and find him mid? Or do you just outright hate him? And how powerful do you think Lodestar truly is? I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.